screen. If you have any tech questions, you can type them there as well. And without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Erin.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back with the Nonprofit Learning Lab and covering my favorite topic, web accessibility. And today's webinar doesn't require any prior expertise. I am going to focus on concepts more than code. And everything here is meant to be really usable in real nonprofit contexts. So please feel free to put your questions over in the questions panel, and I'll get to as many as I can at the end. I am also willing to share my email so people can get in touch with me, and I can follow up with any questions we didn't have time to address today. So let's look at the plan for today. I'm going to go over what disability is in terms of a definition. Then we will move into WCAG and what accessibility actually means online. And then we'll look at some common barriers and then finish with some practical next steps. Okay, let's dive right in. Let's start by talking about how we define disability and how this has changed over the years. So historically, disability has always been framed as a personal defect. The problem lived in the individual and not the environment. And this model shaped policy for centuries, and it still lingers today in contexts like hospitals and schools. And you can already see the issue with defining disability in this way. Anytime we talk about what is outside the range of normal human ability, we start getting into trouble. So that was the medical model, and that started all the way back in the 18th century. And then we had a response to the medical model, which was deemed the social model that started in the mid-70s. And it focused on disability as a societal barrier. So this social model completely flips the medical model and says it doesn't come from within the individual. Disability is created by barriers and not bodies. And it is inaccessible design that disables people. Now, this was a really important and necessary response to the medical model, but of course it overlooks the very real issues that people can have with their bodies. And so really we needed something that combined the two. And so in 1977, we got what's called the biopsychosocial model. And this is the current standard that is adopted by the World Health Organization. It is the most complex, but it is the most true to what's actually going on. What it says is that disability emerges from an interaction between people and their environment. And also that people can have disabling thoughts. The way we view ourselves can actually be disabling. So we have biological, psychological, environmental, and societal factors that all go into, the definition of what it means to have a disability. And this is the model that I feel everyone should adopt and that most savvy organizations have already adopted. Okay, so now that we have a definition, let's go into looking at some physical barriers. So these are the barriers you're probably familiar with in the built environment. So important to ground this in the physical world first before we move on to the digital world. And also, if you don't experience a disability in your everyday life, these barriers might be invisible to you, but once you see them, you can't unsee them. So I'll give you a few examples. You've probably all seen something like this, some stairs that a wheelchair user can't use and no associated ramp. You've probably also seen this situation, a curb without a curb cut. So this is not only a disabling environmental factor to a wheelchair user, but it's also disabling to lots of other people, like parents pushing a baby in a stroller or someone pulling rolling luggage behind them, rushing to the airport. So this was one of the first barriers that got addressed in society. And it's also the barrier that made us all aware that if we can make the environment more accessible to people with disabilities, then it becomes more usable to all people. Let's look at one more case. A paper menu in English. You might not see an immediate issue with this, but what if you're a blind user and you need a Braille copy? Or what if you don't speak English? What if you're used to being able to access a digital menu and use your screen reader to read out the contents to you? So a paper menu without alternative versions is also an accessibility barrier, not one that you've probably thought of. Okay, let's go into some digital barriers. So let's translate this over to the online experience now. Websites can disable people just as easily as the built space. And digital barriers are now among the most common accessibility barriers because most of us live a lot of our lives online now. Okay, so one example. Hey, do you want to check out our homepage content? You'll just have to tab through this preponderance of navigational menu items before you get there. So this is a daily reality for keyboard and screen reader users. It's totally exhausting and completely avoidable with a simple technique called a skip link. Or, okay, we have this great offer for you. If you want to take advantage of it, click the red button below. But if you have a color vision deficiency, it looks like this, and now you don't know which one is the red button. This is important because color alone can't convey meaning. We all experience color differently. And so we really can't rely on color cues. And then this next one, screen reader users will use something inside of their screen reader tool called a link list often to browse the web. And if that link list is full of text that says, click here, read more, learn more, click here, they will have no idea what they're about to click on. So links need to make sense out of context because this is how many users will experience your links. Screen reader users navigate by links alone oftentimes. And so this is very inaccessible. All right, so this next one is what a blind user sees when they encounter an image on your website. Something we often forget because there's such an emphasis on including rich media content in your website, like images and videos, but this is how a blind user experiences that. Blind users don't see images, they hear images via alt text. And if there is no alt text, what the screen reader will read out often is the title of the image. And how do we title images? Usually something like this. So this demonstrates the importance of using actual alt text. Okay, so now that I've given you some examples of what digital barriers can look like, I want to ground us in the WCAG standards, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So what is this? If you're here at this webinar today, you've probably heard of WCAG, but you might not know what it refers to. So just a quick primer on this. WCAG is a global accessibility standard. It lays out for us in definable terms what accessibility means in very specific contexts online. And it's the foundation of most accessibility laws around the world. So let's dive in. So WCAG has evolved alongside technology. It started in May of 1999. We got the first version of WCAG, WCAG 1.0. And that really addressed basic HTML accessibility. So the people that write WCAG, it's a working group within the World Wide Web Consortium, or the W3C, and they are titled the Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI. And they wrote this set of standards, you know, really, like, if you think back, the ADA came out in 1990, so the web wasn't really a thing back then. So ADA really, they had no guidelines on how to create, you know, equal access online. So we really needed a supplement to the ADA, and that's really what WCAG does. It gives us a set of technology agnostic, testable statements that can serve as statements that your quality control engineer would use, for example, when checking the website to make sure that we've addressed different barriers that can come up in specific contexts. And it looks at not just HTML accessibility, but it looks at all kinds of factors across the disability spectrum, from mobility disorders, cognition disorders. It also addresses usability as well, for the reasons I stated before. So if we look at the evolution of this, about every 10 years, we get a new, although it's accelerating more recently, we get a new version of WCAG. Right now, we're up to version 2.2. And over the years, we've incorporated more and more statements related to not just the ones that are easier to address in the digital space, which would be vision and hearing, but later versions of WCAG addressed, you know, cognitive impairments. What do we do, you know, for people with learning disabilities? Like, these are really difficult questions to answer early on. And so, as I said, we're up to 2.2 now. That's the most recent version. Version 3.0 is still about half a decade away. It's going to be a complete overhaul. But the important thing for you to know is that 2.1 AA is the adopted ADA standard and conformance level. So that is the level that we should all be aiming toward with our digital assets, our websites, our apps, all of it. And these success criteria, there are 86 total of them in WCAG 2.2. They're grouped under 4 principles, which are called the POUR principles, or the core POUR. And I'm going to spend a moment going over those now. So POUR, let's dive in. The first one is perceivable. So what this really refers to is answering the question, can I perceive all of your content using at least one sense? Okay, so let's break this down. Usually in the accessibility space, what we're trying to do is make sure that if one sense is not working, then we can replace it with another sense. So for example, if you can't see, can you hear? Or if you can't hear, can you see? Or if you can neither see nor hear, can you touch, right? So you'll see this in, for example, screen readers would be the most widely used assistive tech for people who cannot see. They use the fact that they can hear, and so they will hear all of the content that someone would normally see. If you can't hear, if you're deaf, then we have captions, right, and transcripts and things that we can use our eyes to interpret that information instead of our ears. If you can't see or hear, we have something called a refreshable braille display. So people that are deafblind will take in the web through a little display that will take the text content and translate that into braille in real time, and that will refresh. And it's a really cool device. I challenge everyone to go look up what a refreshable braille display looks like. But that's basically what perceivable is talking about, is we need to be able to perceive the content with at least one sense. Okay. Next one, operable. So can I interact with all of your content using a keyboard and mouse or some other assistive technology that mimics a keyboard and mouse? So when we talk about this operable principle, it's important to remind ourselves that the main ways we interact with the web is through these 2 common devices, keyboard and mouse. And a mouse is much more difficult to use than a keyboard. A mouse requires much more precise motor coordination to use than a keyboard. So often we really boil it down to just using a keyboard. We try to answer the question, would this app or website be usable by a keyboard only user? But there are other input devices that we never see. If we are able-bodied, we might never experience a joystick or might never use voice-activated technology. There are also people that use head wands, people that use mouth sticks or switch devices. There's a whole range of switch devices. These are devices that mimic the clicking that would occur in a mouse, the left and right click. We can have pedals, like if you're an amputee, you know, you've lost your arm, but you have full use of your legs, we can have a pedal with a left and right click. Sip and puff devices, so if you puff, it's a right click. If you sip, it's a left click. There's all kinds of really cool and creative devices out there. I challenge everyone to go to YouTube and type in common switch devices for accessibility and prepare to be wowed by that. But this is what we're talking about with the operable principle. Okay, understandable is the next one. And really what understandable refers to in this context is something more like predictability. And so just to demonstrate this, I'm going to bring up this slide. So this is a little weird in that I've changed the location of the acronym. I have changed the color of the font. I have taken out the image of the water glass that you have gotten used to over the last couple of slides, and I've replaced it with something that is admittedly cute, the happiest animal in the world, the quokka. As cute as he is, why did I put it there? What was the reason? And so when we're in an online context, what understandability really means is predictability. So content needs to be clear, consistent, and predictable. I just demonstrated it in live time. Hopefully the little feeling of discomfort that you had when everything shifted around just there demonstrated this, but basically what we're trying to do here is make sure that if we're representing groups of information, we are doing so in a consistent way. So we want to use, you know, the same colors, the same locations of basic controls. That's a big part of it. But we also want to use simple language. We want to, you know, reduce our use of idioms, which is a problem for translation tools. We don't want to use jargon or acronyms wherever possible. And we do want to write for the reading level of our target audience, which for a general audience is the 9th grade. So that's a big part of it. Keeping your navigational menu in the same place from page to page, keeping your icon usage self-consistent, you know, like using the same symbols to represent the same kinds of information. If you have any help text, making sure that like it's not the changing location on the page from page to page. That kind of thing is really important for people with cognitive impairments, but really for everybody. Okay, so let's go on to the last principle, which is robust. And robust just really has to do with making sure that the content can be loaded and interpreted equally well on any operating system, browser, or device. So in the early days, we had these browser wars where certain apps and websites would load on certain browsers or operating systems, but not on others. We still have this today, to be honest, but it's considered an accessibility barrier if your website wouldn't work equally well on Chrome as Firefox, as Internet Explorer, or Safari. So that's a big part of what we do. But we also want to make sure it works equally well on Apple and Windows and Android, right? So despite what the big tech companies think and how they would like to compete with each other in this way, they are being forced to make their tools accessible across different mediums. And thank goodness. Okay, I'd like to do a really quick poll because if you're here, it means that you care about digital accessibility, and probably most of you have come up against some barriers within your own organization, not necessarily accessibility barriers, but barriers to your forward progress and momentum in implementing an accessibility program. So I ask you, tell me what is stopping you from fully implementing digital accessibility in your organization. Is it A, that you have competing organizational priorities, B, lack of alignment on the value of digital accessibility. Maybe the leadership in your company doesn't see it as a priority. C, inadequate tools and services for addressing accessibility. D, a lack of technical knowledge, or E, an insufficient budget. So choose one of those, just one that best describes your organization. I'll give you a moment. Okay, is everyone selected?
It's like we've had about 68% of people voting, so we can
Okay.
give it a couple more seconds. And attendees, please do the poll. I can go ahead and close the poll and share the results if you'd like.
Perfect. Okay, so it looks like the most popular answer here was lack of technical knowledge. Okay, that's an interesting one. I hope to address that fully today. We also have competing organizational priorities coming in second place. I absolutely hear that one all the time. We also have insufficient budget coming in third, and then inadequate tools and services, and then lack of alignment on the value of digital accessibility. Okay, so all of these are major factors, and I'm just going to show you now how a large batch of industry professionals across many, many nonprofit organizations answered this question. So this is actually a real poll that was conducted by a group called Level Access, and they published the results in their 7th annual State of Digital Accessibility report. They come out with this report every year. So this is over 1,600 respondents, and you can see that it differed a little bit from your responses, but this is how it stacked up across this large group. So competing organizational priorities, there's a lack of alignment in general on the value of this. People feel that they don't have the right tools, or that they don't have the right knowledge, or that they don't have budget. They can't convince their leadership teams to put money towards training or towards buying accessibility tools. So that's really, really common. And the way that most organizations get into caring about accessibility is through legal pressure. That is the traditional, first reason organizations will start to care, but values-based motivations are growing. Really, whatever your reason, all of these paths can lead to good outcomes. We do have to build capacity within every organization and convince them of the importance of implementing this. And oftentimes, the way to convince people is by talking about just the scope of the problem here, that over 1 billion people on the planet have a disability. It's about 1.3 billion people. And that's about 1 in 6 of us, or 16% of the population. So it's just a group that has too much market power to ignore these days. Even if you don't have a disability yourself, a loved one, a family member, a friend, or a colleague probably has a disability, and you will vote with your dollars to support organizations and companies that prioritize them having equal access to their services and products. And so that is becoming increasingly the major reason why people start implementing accessibility. I'm here to say that we do this work because it's the right thing to do. Period. There are people on the other side of the screen that just want to feel included, and that is the most important reason to do accessibility. I'm sure for many of you that is your reason as well, but you're just having trouble convincing others of that. So anyway, let's go into tackling this notion that accessibility needs, you know, a wide range of complicated tools to fix or very deep technical knowledge. I'm going to pull up for you now the results of the 2025 WebAIM Millions report. So this is published every year. It's an accessibility analysis of the top 1,000,000 homepages. These would be the most popular homepages by traffic. And we're going to look at what percentage of them have a range of accessibility barriers. These are the top 6 in the most recent report. And I can tell you, because I read this report every year, that these have been the top 6 for the past 7 years, almost since they've been doing this report. They haven't changed. And the fixes for these are pretty straightforward. So let's dive in. We have low contrast text. This is impacting almost 80% of all homepages. Then missing alternative text for images. So well over half have at least one instance of that. Missing form input labels, about half have at least one of those. Empty links, empty buttons, and missing document language. I'm going to dive into each one of these, but these are the top 6. And if you want to read the full report, you will get a copy of these slides after, and you'll be able to check out the source. I'm just going to dive into each one because if we could solve these top 6, the web would be a much more accessible place. Okay, so let's look at low contrast text. This is the most common failure on the web still today. And it's one of the easiest ones to fix. So you've probably all experienced going to a website and you can't read the text because it is too non-distinct from its background color. So this is something that affects people with low vision. If you have aging eyes, this is very, very frustrating to deal with. And so it was one of the first WCAG success criteria that was written. It was 1.4.3. I've linked to all of these. But basically, it's any text that can't be distinguished from its background. And officially, WCAG says we have to maintain a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 for regular text and 3 to 1 for large text. So as you see on the right, the color of the last line, "Can you see me?" is the same color that I have down here in "How about now?" but it's more readable because it's bigger. So that's why we have the 2 different minimum thresholds based on size. If we're talking about text and logos or purely decorative text or meaningless text the user never interacts with, those would be the exceptions to this rule. But most text in an app or on a website is there because it's communicating something important. So we have to make sure that we are respecting this, this minimum threshold contrast. And it's super easy to do. There's a free tool you can download, Color Contrast Analyzer. I've linked to it here, but there's many other free tools. And they will allow you to sample the foreground and background color. They'll tell you exactly what the ratio is. So what I'm referring to is the brightness of the pixels in the foreground versus the brightness of the pixels in the background. We can quantify what that brightness value is in each case. And if you're not meeting the standard, it's just a matter of tweaking the color just a little bit. You might have to saturate the color a little bit, make it a little bit more bright, make it a little bit darker, depending on if you have a light or dark background. But your designer can easily make this change, and your developer can implement it in the CSS settings in literally a minute. So that is something that is well within our ability to fix without any special tools at all. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, missing alt text. Okay, so these would be images that don't have a text descriptor that would totally exclude screen reader users. The important thing to remember about alt text is that it needs to convey not just the content of the image, but the meaning. It should say something about intent, like why was this image placed here? And so yeah, let's dive into this. This is the very first success criteria, 1.1.1. It deals with a very, very common issue. So it was the first one ever written. The fix is we need to fill in the alt attribute for all images or other non-text content. So that, for example, would be icons, like your social media icons in your footer, any input controls, those little arrows that you see in carousels. So if those little arrows don't have a text descriptor, then a blind user wouldn't know what to do with them. There's a really important exception here, which is images that are purely decorative. So if that's the case, we want to leave the alt text blank to signal that screen readers should skip over that image. Now, why would we want to do that? The reason has to do with the fact that as sighted users, we can go to a website and easily skim and scan and find the information we're looking for right away. But a screen reader user is a captive audience to what their screen reader tool reads out to them. They can only advance as fast as their screen reader advances through the page. So if there's anything there that is purely decorative, it's not conveying meaning, we don't want to waste the person's time who's trying to just get a sense of the content that's there. So basically what's going on is, you know, accessibility advocates are begging us and pleading, like, we know, like, this happens all the time. It's about 80% of images on the web are there for decorative reasons only. It's like a visual breath or like a resting place, but it serves no purpose for a screen reader user. So there's a really nice free tool. You can get browser extensions that can check and highlight images that are missing alt text, and then you can just go through them one by one and say, is it really necessary to add it here? So I'm putting up this example of these hands holding some cherry tomatoes. And one alt that is accurate would be handful of cherry tomatoes. Okay, that's a perfectly accurate representation of what's going on here, but it doesn't convey the meaning. Let's say this is in the context of an organic farm that teaches organic farming principles to high school kids. Okay, so the better alt text here would be student holds cherry tomatoes picked from new organic school garden. That paints the better picture of what's going on for a blind user. And you can see why, right? It's capturing the intent. So just remember, alt text needs to convey meaning and not just appearance. All right, let's go on to the next one, missing form labels. So if you are a screen reader user, again, and you're trying to fill out a form and that form only has placeholder text, but no actual labels next to the fields, which is very common today. People do this to save on-screen real estate. That is very, very inaccessible because screen readers don't read out placeholder text. They only read out the actual labels next to the fields, like you see at the upper right. So basically what this takes the shape of is a form input missing a label tag or an ARIA label. And an ARIA label is something that we place in the code. It is something that a screen reader user will hear, but a sighted user will not see. So these are like the little invisible labels that live behind a website or an app that help out blind users. And this relates to the understandable criteria. Really, the remedy is simple. You just ask your developer to always include field labels. And there are no exceptions to this, but you can hide your labels and still give them accessible names if you need to. In rare cases, that might be needed. So there is a free tool to check this. Again, there's a tool called WAVE, the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. WebAIM puts it out. It's the same group that did the Millions report I mentioned before. And it is a very common tool that's used to detect accessibility barriers. If you want to download it and use it over time to check the compliance of your own website, that would be great. Just know that automated checkers can only detect about 25 to 35% max of all of the possible accessibility barriers that exist on the web. So nobody should be really relying on these tools 100%. We need human evaluators to look for these errors, but it is a good starting point. Okay, empty links. I only have a couple of these left, and then we're going to get into your questions. So empty links would be like if you have links to your social media in your footer and you think, well, everybody can recognize that that's the Facebook logo, right? Well, not if you can't see that logo and you don't immediately know what that means. So we shouldn't be leaving things like this. The search magnifying glass at the upper right that is often lacking a search label, or any clickable image link that doesn't have alt text would be considered and reported out as an empty link. So the official definition, any link that has no text associated with it. This is on almost half of those homepages that were evaluated. And really the remedy is we always want to include text in any link tag. If there's alt text already, then you don't have to put any link text in the front end. The screen reader will know what it is. And again, the best tool to evaluate if you are violating this or not is the WAVE tool. It can check this one very accurately. Okay, next one, empty buttons. So buttons without labels. These are also silent to assistive tech. And this often breaks key actions on the website. It's another small fix with a really big impact. So if you have a form and let's say the button to submit that form doesn't have the word submit, but it just has a checkbox on it. I've actually seen this more than you could imagine, buttons without any text at all. And really, the remedy here is just to add text on the button tags or add a value attribute to any input tags. So this is really something to share with your developer. And if they have any questions about it, you can send them to me. And if there's already alt text there, then you don't have to have button text, but that's really not a best practice at all. Every button should have text on it that describes what the button does. All right, and you can check this with WAVE again. So this is the recurring theme, right? This is a free tool. WAVE is a free tool. So this doesn't have to be expensive. A lot of you said, you know, you're lacking budget. Well, you can go back to your team and say, hey, these tools to fix these most common errors are completely free. Last one, missing document language. So in the code behind your website, there's a little attribute that basically spells out which language your content exists in. And there's a set of ISO standard codes that refer to these. I've linked to it here. So it's a 30-second fix to make sure that that declaration is in there. There's no exception to this. And it's probably the easiest thing to fix. It's important to define this because screen readers need to know what language to read in, and it also affects pronunciation. So that is a one-line fix with a huge payoff. Okay, so I'm just going to leave you with some practical tips to get started within your own organization. If you haven't really started implementing an accessibility program yet, here are some starting points. So first of all, I would submit some feedback to your leadership team. If they do an annual survey of employee satisfaction or something like that, try to raise this as an issue, add it to the agenda of your next board meeting as well. You know, ask open-ended questions about how this is impacting your user base. Tip number 2, you can ask to update your organizational user personas. Most organizations have formalized personas that represent their audience groups. You can ask for them to incorporate common disabilities. So you can start designing for these from the outset for any new thing, any new website pages, any new tools you would put out in the future. Then you can elect someone in-house to serve as your accessibility champion and take requests for accommodation. So you don't have to be an accessibility expert. requests for accommodation normally sound like, hey, I'm really having trouble filling out this form. Can I like read you off my information and have you type it in? Right? So these are things that anybody can do usually. And you can also, if you're not sure how to do what they're asking, you can at least be a voice that someone can speak to so that they know that you're listening. And that has a ton of value. Tip number 4, build awareness among the team. You can start an accessibility Slack channel if you use Slack. You could celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day. That's coming up on May 21st. Just talk about it among your team. Tip 5, you can help draft an accessibility statement for your organization. There's a free generator tool from the World Wide Web Consortium that will help you do this and place it on your website. You can also start adding captions to your video and audio files. You can go to your website and navigate it with a keyboard. Just use the tab key, put your mouse away, and see what happens. There's a video that shows how to keyboard navigate a website and all the controls you need to know. You will be shocked, probably, at what things get skipped over, what things are not clickable, what things you can and can't select. And those are also easy things to fix if you have a developer that has a basic knowledge of ARIA. And then last tip, audit all of the software that you use for their WCAG compliance levels. So you can go to all of your third-party vendors and request what's called a VPAT, a Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. This is the report that details what WCAG compliance level a tool is using, and it's very important to start a library of these. So if anyone asks, have you done your due diligence in your procurement, then you can say yes and show them all of the documentation you've collected. It is important to always be looking for accessible tools that are an alternative to what you're using today if you find out that something is inaccessible. I think that's really all I had today. I do want to leave you with this special offer that if you want to take the next step forward, I want to be a resource to you in that. So I will give you a complimentary audit of your website to look for these barriers, and we'll have a discussion on how to overcome them. This is not a sales pitch. This is just an invitation. I'm not going to try to hard sell you on anything. Really, my company builds websites. We don't sell accessibility services, but this is something that I'm just passionate about, and I would love to help anyone who is willing and wants to learn. So really, accessibility, it's a journey. I hope that this helps you take the first step, and I'm here to answer any questions that you have.
Amazing. We do have a couple of questions so far. The first one is there a different set of criteria if you're putting text on an image or a pattern?
If you're putting it on an image or a pattern, yeah, so I would say if you're putting it on a pattern, if you're referring to like a background texture or something that's decorative, then that would be a case where we wouldn't use alt text. But no, the criteria is always the same for all images on the web. Like the main question to answer is it decorative or is it not? And most patterns, most background textures are decorative. No screen reader user needs to hear textured blue background. That doesn't really contribute to any meaning. So I don't know if that answered the question. Were you referring to a different kind of pattern?
I'm not seeing them answer in the chat. I think
Okay.
my understanding is that is what they were meaning. Okay. We have someone else asking if you have ideas on ways to integrate other languages.
Yes. So, I mean, first of all, most browsers these days can auto-detect, modern browsers can auto-detect the language setting that someone has in their browser, and they will automatically. Many websites these days will automatically just update the language to match that language, but you can also put a little language switcher on your website, and there are plenty of those out there. The one caution I will say is to make a language switcher perfectly accessible. First of all, flags are not languages. I would not identify languages by flags. You want to identify them by the name of the language in the target language. So if you had a language switcher that went between English and Spanish, it should say English and Espanol, not English and Spanish. So there are, here at the agency, we use a tool called gTranslate, and we make sure that all of our language switchers show the language in the target language. But yeah, other than putting a language switcher on your website or app, then you know, oftentimes you can rely on the browser to just automatically switch the language. The other thing I would say about language is definitely go to any YouTube or Vimeo video or other such, you know, videos hosted online. There's usually a place to, right next to where you put the captions, there's a place where you can provide a native speaker translation. You can manually edit the auto translation, and this is really important to do because, you know, the translation algorithms aren't perfect. It's the same principle as when you edit captions. You want to make sure that you're correcting all of the errors that the auto captions had. If you've ever talked to a deaf person, they'll tell you that they still refer to captions as craptions because they're so bad. So this is a general theme in accessibility and usability. Like, these AI tools are wonderful, but we have to have human oversight. They need to be in the hands of somebody skilled, somebody that knows the context and the meaning that's trying to be conveyed. I just went, you know, on a little tangent there, but hopefully that was helpful.
Perfect. Sorry, so many questions. So where I was got pushed down. Do you have examples of sites with good accessibility?
Yes. Yeah, so within the nonprofit space, I could direct you to Donors Choose. That's a site that adopted great accessibility practices, even though they were not sued, they were not forced to do so. The American Heart Association. Yeah, I mean, there's several out there. I could send a list around, but I would start with those two. A lot of the examples you'll see are in like the you know, government space, or like banks, corporate, you know, large corporations that have been sued and they've been forced to make their websites accessible. And so I like to give examples in the nonprofit space specifically. I usually direct people to, yeah, to Donors Choose and American Heart Association. Any website by Elevation Web, sorry for the shameless plug, but our websites are fully accessible. So if you go to any website in our portfolio, ours are ADA compliant, and they've addressed the entire, all of the success criteria that we talked about today, plus many others. You can also go to gov.uk. It's considered the most accessible website in the world. So that is another great example, but outside of the nonprofit domain.
Amazing. Do you have any recommendations for accessibility plugins?
Accessibility plugins. So I'm going to throw this out there. It's a controversial statement, but okay. So yes, I do want to give a shout out to the Paciello group, their color contrast analyzer. That's a wonderful little free desktop client that allows you to check your color contrast. I also really like the Wave tool. And, you know, there's, let's see, the other ones. There's so many good ones. It's more about what I would caution against. So what I would caution against would be these what so-called overlay tools that say that you can slap them on your website and they will on the fly remediate any kind of accessibility barriers they find in the code. These tools overstate what they're capable of doing in terms of accessibility compliance. So tools, you know, like UserWay, Accessibly, there's a whole host of them, but most of them claim that if you pay, you know, $99 or whatever, then we can slap this tool on and it will solve all of your accessibility barriers and make your website compliant. And there was a class action lawsuit a couple of years back that found that these tools as a whole overstate what they're able to do. As I mentioned before, they're only able to find about a third, optimistically, of all accessibility barriers on the web. So they really cannot claim to make your site compliant. That is something you need to build into your pipeline from the beginning of any website you're building or any other app you're designing. It needs to be factored in from the beginning and not just slapped on like a Band-Aid solution at the end. But yes, like there's many good tools out there. And now that I know you're interested, I can send around a list that can be distributed with my slides after this presentation.
Perfect. My organization does a lot of webinars and videos. Can you speak to the standards for that format of web content?
For webinars and videos, if you're referring to the WCAG standards, like, so what they would ask for you to do in a video context is, first of all, always have captions and optional translations, like try to determine, you know, like if there are any people in the audience that don't speak your language natively. So that would be kind of core best practice. You also don't want to make cameras on mandatory. Zoom fatigue is a real thing, or, you know, GoToMeeting fatigue, as it were. Pick the tool of choice, but for people, there are some people with cognitive impairments where it's really jarring to see like the big grid, you know, of 25 people looking at you and then have to be looking at yourself simultaneously. That can cause cognitive exhaustion. I would not make cameras on mandatory. That became something during the pandemic that people started asking everyone, oh, make sure your camera's on at all times. That shouldn't be a thing anymore. You should have the option. Other things, like if you want to get extra credit, go ahead and get an ASL interpreter. For people who are deaf, that's always appreciated if you have the budget for it. But yeah, and I would also, like, for people who are blind, like when you go around and introduce yourself, try to imagine that like the person can't see you and describe, you know, like in addition to your name and your role and where you're from and why you're here, it's like, oh, by the way, you know, you know, if I were describing myself, I would say, my name is Erin, you know, I'm the accessibility director at Elevation. I am a Caucasian middle-aged woman with brown hair and green eyes, and I wear glasses. And today I'm wearing a purple top with a scarf, right? So that's the kind of thing that someone would really appreciate if they can't actually see the participants and they choose to have their camera on.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Any recommendations for resources to continue our education on web accessibility?
Yes. Oh my goodness. There's so many. I think a good place to start is there's a Foundations of Digital Accessibility course. It is free. It is put out by the World Wide Web Consortium. Everyone at my organization has taken it. It is mandatory. And, you know, it's great free accessibility training. So I would start there. I would keep on your radar organizations like DEQUE. They do a lot of accessibility training, professional training. And then level access, from the poll results I shared today, they publish a lot of industry reporting and keep tabs on new assistive tech that's coming out. They have a very good blog. Yeah, I would start there.
Amazing. I have a question of how could we receive the complimentary audit?
Yeah, I guess, you know, I have talked with Nonprofit Learning Lab. They have my email address, you know, so they will be sharing that out so that you can all get in touch with me. And I will then, if you write to me, I will share my calendar link. You would just schedule a time. It's about 1 hour. We step through your website. It usually involves like a 3-page audit. I can't look at every single page of your website. It is a manual audit, so it does take me quite a while to go through. But I'll audit your homepage and like up to 2 additional pages that you ask me to or that I feel are important. And then we'll just step through all of the things that those automated checker tools miss. So yeah, you can get in touch with me via whatever Nonprofit Learning Lab shares with you after this presentation.
Awesome. And then I have a long one here for you. We have a podcast we post on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcast apps. We're starting to provide captions on YouTube. And I know Apple Podcasts allows manual captions, but platforms like Spotify and most podcast apps do not. What I have seen is in the description of some podcasts, they provide a full transcript of the podcast on their website. Is that a suitable solution? Should we just direct people who need captions to just go on YouTube? Any insight is appreciated.
Yeah, transcripts, I would say that what you've done there is a good example of you've provided alternatives. So you've pointed out here are the channels that you can go to for a fully accessible experience, and you've done your best to work around these tool limitations. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Putting the transcripts right there on your website, that's what some of the most popular podcasts in the world are doing these days. As long as you're providing, an equivalent experience somewhere. I know when I talked about robust, it needs to work across all different browsers and tools. Well, in this case, that's not your fault. Some of these platforms just don't offer that, offer an accessible experience. So like having a statement clear on your website on the page that introduces your podcast, that reinforces your commitment to accessibility and talking about where you can go to get accessible versions, of the audio is really in this case the best you can do. And I'd say that's a great accommodation.
Perfect. I think the rest of the questions have actually already been answered by other questions. There's one here of like, is there a tool to flag for accessibility gaps for mobile versions for a website? I think this has already sort of been touched on with you not recommending the browser tools, but if you have any comments on mobile versions.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part. So these automated checker tools like Wave, they work the same on mobile and desktop. They are, as the robust principle demands, they work whether you're in a mobile environment or not. So you can go ahead and click those on, or you can download them, and have them work on all different kinds of devices. So yeah, my recommendation would be the same. There isn't like a mobile specific automated checker tool. Usually they'll give you a report of the errors it finds on desktop and mobile. So, even now, like if you go to Google Lighthouse, if you go to PageSpeed Insights and put in your URL, you'll get an accessibility score in addition to like the performance score. Now they have an accessibility score, and it's different on desktop and mobile, and it will give you diagnostics like, it'll point you towards what the major barriers are. So that's another like good free tool that works on both.
Perfect. Those are, we just did get, well, we are actually out of time as well, but really fast. Are there things to watch out for when building a mobile site alongside the desktop?
Things to watch out for on a mobile site. Yeah, so on mobile, different things arise. So you want to make sure that your images are in vector format so that they can be scaled appropriately. When you're creating the mobile versions, you want to adjust those font sizes so that the fonts are not scaling down too small. You want to make sure touch targets are large enough. So if the little dots under your carousel or the little arrows that exist as little controls on desktop, you want to make sure that when your image slideshow or what have you scales down, that those touch targets don't scale down as well. And so that's a really common problem. For people, so on mobile, a lot of times people will use two fingers to zoom in and out. But what happens when you only have one finger or you don't have a hand at all? So in those instances, you want to make an accommodation of putting like a plus and a minus that can be accessed through a stylus, rather than relying on people always having two fingers. So yeah, there's many, but those are a few.
Perfect. Okay, we have now come to a close. Erin, if you have any final statements for our participants, now is the best time to share them, and then I'll close us out.
Yes, I just want to thank all of you for coming today, for your time, for caring about inclusion. And I do want to reinforce that this is about people and not perfection. So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Just get started today, even if you're doing it imperfectly, and you'll learn over time. That's how I started. I started, 6 years ago. I had no knowledge of this stuff, and I just started. If you want some examples, I have an accessibility policy that I've written here for the agency. I'm happy to share it upon request with anyone who would like to see it. There's a lot of detail in there that could be food for thought for you developing your own accessibility policy at your organization. And that's really it.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. This workshop has now come to a close. If you're interested in receiving the recording materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Erin, for educating our community.
You're very welcome.
Bye, everyone.